Have you ever worked in a hospital at night? Have you ever felt that there was something watching you while everyone slept? What if that door you always avoid hides something that no one dares to tell you about? Would you have the courage to investigate a closed corridor at 3 a.m., knowing that the last person who entered was never seen again? If stories like this chill you to the bone, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell so you don't miss the next reports from the darkest shift you'll ever hear. Comment below, would you be brave enough to do this shift? The silence of hallway. B. St. Vincent's Municipal Hospital, located in Dublin, Ireland, was not large, but it carried decades of stories crossed in its cold and whitish walls. Between the silent corridors and the constant smell of disinfectant, the routine seemed predictable to those who didn't pay attention. But all the professionals who worked there knew the night shift hid more than just sleeping patients. Laura had been a nurse for 6 years, young but hardened by endless shifts and cases that she would rather forget. She was not easily impressed. I had seen it all: aggressions, psychotic breaks, sudden deaths. Therefore, when he received the shift change on that rainy Friday, with a brief notice that Corridor B would be isolated for electrical maintenance, he just nodded, took his badge, and went straight to the nursing station. The warning was common, but the frequency with which Corridor B was isolated in recent months drew attention. Once a week, almost always on Fridays, and always at dawn. Laura, curious by nature, began to notice patterns. Patients who were changed wards, medical records disappearing temporarily, and the sound, a high-pitched, intermittent sound that seemed to come from the back of the hallway like a beep, but too irregular to be from any device she knew. That night, with the rain pattering on the windows, something was different. The generator had failed for a few seconds, causing the lights to flicker before resuming their opaque illumination. Laura felt a shiver run down her spine. He took his flashlight and went out for a silent round. As he passed through Corridor B, he found the insulation tape loosely attached. No real danger warning. Curiosity won. With silent steps, he pushed the tape away and entered the corridor. The sound came back, a shuffling, almost human beep. The light inside was dimmer. The lamps flickered as if struggling to stay lit. At the end of the corridor, one of the doors was ajar. The infirmary 2-13. She had never heard of this room. It was not on any internal map. Fear was already itching at the back of her neck, but she continued. He pushed the door open with his fingertips, revealing a room with moldy walls, covered in old photos. They were black and white records of patients, doctors, and something else. A figure that appeared repeatedly in the images, always in the corner, always blurred. A woman in a lab coat, hair covering her face. Laura felt her heart race. He decided to search the place. There was an old, rusty closet in the corner, locked with a chain. On the floor, folders were scattered, many without identification. She bent down to pick up one of them. Inside, he found handwritten medical notes dating back to the 1970s, experimental treatments, reports of patients with severe neurological symptoms, insomnia, delusions, visual hallucinations. Many of the cases ended abruptly with the word transferred. As he read, the beep sounded louder, closer. She raised her head and saw, reflected in the window pane, a silhouette behind her. Quickly, she turned her body and saw no one. But the reflection, it was still there. The figure standing on the glass seemed to watch her, motionless. As he got closer, he noticed that the reflex moved late, as if it was stuck in another frequency. The air inside began to thicken, and a metallic smell spread through the room. Laura tried to open the door, but it was locked. He ran to the closet and tried to break the lock with an iron bar found next to it. He managed to open with effort. Inside, a wooden box with a carved inscription, "Forbidden to open outside designated hours." Under the lid, photographic records of clandestine autopsies and a diary. In the diary, notes from a doctor named Dr. Katia Oliveira, who described sessions with special patients taken to the hospital during the dictatorship, without documents, without history, without return. The beep stopped. Behind her, The door slammed with a bang. When he tried to open it, it was locked. The light failed completely, leaving only the faint beam of his flashlight flickering on the walls. A whisper filled the room. "Why did you come in here?" Laura froze. The sound did not come from an intercom or a patient. It was real, close, and came from inside the room. The light from the flashlight flashed through the photos again, and one of them was now different. The blurred figure stared directly into the camera. I was no longer on my side, nor covered. It was clear, and he was smiling. The next instant, the flashlight went out. At the nursing station, hours later, the clock showed 5:34 a.m. when the shift was changed. No one saw Laura leave. His lab coat was found hanging on the door of room 213, which now, when opened by one of the maintenance technicians, showed nothing but an empty and dusty stock. Since then, every Friday night, Corridor B is again isolated, and the sound is heard again, always at 3:13 a.m. And it always ends with a whisper, "Why did you come in here?" When the hospital sleeps at St. Thomas Hospital in London, the silence of the early morning is almost absolute, except for the sound of respirators and the soft echo of distant footsteps. Everything seems suspended in time between 2 and 4 in the morning. For many, it is the quietest time. For André, a nursing technician for 9 years, it was when the hospital showed its strangest side. On one of these nights, while reviewing the medical records in Ward 5, he noticed something unusual. A patient registered as deceased at 10 p.m. appeared again connected to the devices with a stable heartbeat. Thinking it was a system error, he went to room 523 to check. When he opened the door, he found the stretcher empty, the monitors turned off, and the temperature of the environment much lower than normal. A damp, metallic smell hung in the air. While recording what happened, he heard the sound of something dragging upstairs. He went up to the deactivated wing of the hospital, where the old psychiatry worked. There, the darkness was total. When he turned on the flashlight, he saw wet footprints on the ground, and a voice whispering his name, Andrew. The voice was not that of any colleague. She was hoarse, trembling, as if she came from someone who hadn't worn her vocal cords for a long time. The hallway was empty, but as you passed through the old containment room, the door was ajar. Inside, nail marks streaked the walls, and a child's pencil drawing shivered in the cold breeze through the locked window. It was a portrait, a figure lying on a bed with open eyes and a black tear flowing. Farther back on a rusty shelf was a diary soaked by humidity. André flipped through carefully, trying to decipher the irregular handwriting. The last few pages described containment sessions with a young woman who spoke with voices from within the walls. There were reports of doctors who fell ill after meeting her. One of them, according to the Daily, had thrown himself from the roof 2 weeks after the last visit. The intercom attached to the wall of the old bedroom came to life with a dry crack. The same voice, now closer. "Why did you erase my name?" André hurriedly went downstairs. When she returned to the medical record system, the patient's name was gone. In the history, only a line typed in red flashed on the screen. "She's still here." Determined to solve it once and for all, André accessed the hospital's physical files. He searched for hours through the old records and found a yellowed card dated 1978. Name, Camila Freitas. Age, 16 years old. Diagnosis, visual hallucinations, dissociative episodes, suicidal tendencies. Last recorded observation, patient transferred to isolation, unusual behavior during the night, reports of voices and interference with electrical equipment. As I turned over the last sheet, a faded photograph fell. It was her, the same girl drawn on the wall of psychiatry, long hair, staring, expressionless. Behind the photo, a handwritten note. Room 523 should not be reopened. The next morning, André tried to avoid the hallway, but at 3:13 a.m. sharp, the room's intercom rang again. He answered with trembling hands. Silence. Then a slow breath accompanied by a whispered sentence, "You left me alone." On the security camera, Recorded at that same time, the door of 523 opens by itself, and, for a few seconds, a white silhouette crosses the corridor towards the infirmary. When reviewing the images with the supervisor, Andre pointed out the figure. The supervisor just shook his head. This room has been sealed for years. There is no more access. Since then, no patient has been able to spend the night in room 523 without reporting dreams of a girl sitting on the edge of the bed asking, "Are you going to erase me too?" Dawn in the emergency room. Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London is known for its efficiency, modern structure, and relentless pace. During the day, doctors and patients cross paths in a hurried back and forth where time never seems enough. But in the early mornings, the hospital changes. The movement stops, the noise dissolves, and all that remains are long, cold corridors, illuminated by pale lights that seem to purposely fail at the wrong moments. Julian, a nurse on duty at the emergency room, had already gotten used to the routine of the early morning. He was 34 years old, with a tired but attentive face, and a growing suspicion that the hospital was hiding something beyond serious patients and urgent cases. Some things just didn't make sense. Doors that opened by themselves, presence sensors activated in empty areas, and a specific room, 204, that everyone avoided transferring patients during the night. On the night of February 11th, the shift had started quietly. Few attendances, light rain hitting the windows, and a slight feeling of torpor common to the calmer dawns. Julian took the opportunity to review medical records and have a coffee in the small improvised cafeteria in the sector. It was 2:27 a.m. when everything changed. The internal heart monitoring system went off. Alarm coming from room 204. The monitor indicated irregular cardiac activity, but no one had been admitted there. The room, according to the system, was empty. Julian stood up immediately and walked through the corridors in silence. The feeling that something was watching him began to tighten in his stomach. As he approached the 204, he noticed that the door was ajar and the interior light on. He took a deep breath, pushed the door slowly and entered. The bed was made. Nothing on the monitors, no sign of a patient. He approached the panel to check if there was a failure in the system when he noticed handprints on the sheet. They were clear, as if someone had just gotten up from there. The heart monitor went off again on its own, displaying a pattern of beats. The name L. Spencer appeared on the screen for a few seconds before disappearing. Julian backed away, and at that moment the door closed tightly behind him. The light flashed and went out for 2 seconds. When he returned, a figure was sitting in the armchair next to the bed. A pale woman, dark and long hair, dressed in an old hospital gown, her face partially hidden by shadow. "Help me," she whispered. Julian froze. He tried to activate the radio, but the device squeaked as if it were out of reach. When he raised his head again, the armchair was empty. The figure had disappeared. He opened the door and ran towards the security room. On the monitor, the camera recording of room 204 showed the empty bed. But in one frame, only one, something appeared behind the door. The silhouette of the woman watching Julian. Frightened, he searched the internal archives. He found old records of a patient named Louise Spencer. Admitted in 1984 after a domestic accident, she suffered cardiac arrest in room 204. According to the file, she was resuscitated, but during the procedure, she fell into a coma and never woke up. He died days later, during the night. Since then, sporadic reports have indicated anomalous activity in the room. Julian tried to forget. He spent the next few days avoiding the hallway, but the following nights were worse. Voices over the intercom calling his name, fake calls to room 204. And most disturbingly, patients who woke up at dawn saying that the sad girl in the next room kept asking for help. On the night of February 17th, he decided to face it head-on. He installed a hidden camera in the 204 and remained in the neighboring room, observing in real time on his cell phone. Around 3:14 a.m., the light in the room turned on by itself. The camera began to distort the image. And then she appeared again, Louise Spencer, standing by the bed, staring directly at the lens. Julian ran to the bedroom. When he entered, there was no one, but the monitor was on, and on the screen, a line pulsed in regular beats. Her name appeared again, along with a phrase, "I didn't sleep. I'm in prison." Since then, Room 204 has been officially sealed by the hospital. No official talks about the case. Julian asked for a transfer weeks later, but before leaving, he left a note hidden in the back of one of the nurse's station drawers. If you hear someone calling your name at dawn and no one is around, don't go to room 204. She's still waiting for someone to listen to her. And to this day, at 3:14 a.m., the motion sensor in that room lights up on its own, always alone. Night shift. Stories from the ICU University College Hospital in the heart of London is one of the most advanced medical centres in Europe. Inside its quiet floors, the intensive care unit maintains a rhythm of its own. Monitors beeping in regular patterns, respirators buzzing like metallic whispers, and attentive nurses circling between beds like tireless shadows. For Clara Evans, an ICU nurse for almost a decade, that environment was like a second home. She had seen it all. Miraculous recoveries, painful goodbyes, emotional breakdowns of family members, and more than once, events that defied any logical explanation. But there was one night in particular that forever changed the way she saw her work. It was early March. A cold wave was punishing the city, and the hospital was full. Clara took over the night shift as usual. At 11 p.m., he checked the medical records and started the first round. Everything seemed in order until she reached bed 9. The patient was an unknown man, identified only as John Doe. He had been found unconscious near King's Cross Station and showed signs of severe hypothermia as well as a head injury. No documents, no digital records, no relatives. When Clara entered the room, she felt a sudden change in temperature. The heart rate monitor oscillated between regular patterns and pauses that were too short. The respirator screen flashed for a moment, displaying the phrase, "He's awake." Clara blinked, thinking she was tired, and the text disappeared. "That's not possible," he murmured. He approached the bed. The man's face was partially covered by bandages, but his eyes, once closed, were now half open, pupils fixed on it. The monitor did not indicate consciousness, but Clara was sure that he was watching her. Suddenly, the ICU call system rang. Internal line. When Clara answered, she heard her own voice, recorded asking, "Can you hear what he thinks?" She hung up immediately, frightened, and went to the security center where she reviewed the call. Nothing was in the history. No calls made, no recordings recorded. Over the next few days, the behavior around bed 9 became strange. Equipment failed when approaching him. On-duty physicians reported vivid dreams of the patient's face. And a nurse said she heard a phrase repeated throughout the night, coming from the intercom. "He's trying to get out." Clara, reluctantly, decided to investigate on her own. He combed through the physical records and old files of the emergency, trying to find out if there were any patterns in similar cases. He found a file hidden among folders of archived files, a patient registered as missing in 1983, found in a deep coma, with no clinical explanations. Photo attached. It was the same man. She didn't want to believe it. He took the photo to compare with the current patient. The similarities were striking. The scar on the eyebrow, the bone structure, even a birth spot on the neck. But that meant that man was hospitalized for more than 40 years. That night, the chaos intensified. At 2:37 a.m., all the ICU monitors flashed at the same time. Several patients experienced sudden drops in saturation. Bed 9, however, maintained stable signals. Clara ran to the place and found the man fully awake, sitting on the bed, staring at nothing. "I've never slept," he said in a dry voice. "They locked me here." Before she could react, all of the ward's electrical systems failed. The ICU plunged into silent darkness. When the emergency light was activated, bed 9 was empty. No sign of the patient. The security cameras failed for exactly 3 minutes and 13 seconds. After hours of searching, nothing was found. No witnesses saw the man leave, and no entry was recorded in the electronic accesses. In the days that followed, patients began to report night visions. They said they saw a man standing by their beds, watching in silence. One patient with respiratory failure said that the man in bed 9 whispered that it would keep him awake forever. Clara asked for leave from the hospital shortly after. Her classmates say she still dreams of that face. Some swear that she talks to herself during shifts. Others say that from time to time, bed 9 reappears as active in the system, even without anyone there. And always, when this happens, the monitors display the same phrase, "He's awake." Between monitors and whispers, Edinburgh General Hospital in Scotland is an old building, built with dark stones and long corridors that never seem to end. Modern renovations have tried to soften the Gothic look of the place, but for those who work there during the night, such as nurse Rachel McConnell, the atmosphere was still charged, especially in the south wing, where the cardiac observation sector was located. Rachel was used to the repetitive sounds of the monitors, the constant beep of the heartbeat, the hiss of oxygen, the sporadic alerts of pressure drops. It was almost an uncomfortable melody that she learned to ignore. But that week in October, something was different. The sounds began to change, not just technical variations, they were other sounds. Whispers that seemed to come from the sound system, even when turned off. It all started on Monday. During the 3 a.m. patrol, Rachel was alone in the monitor room. One of the devices began to emit a strange sequence of beeps. 3 short, 2 long, then silent, repeatedly. She wrote down what happened and went to room 36, where the signal was coming from. The patient, an elderly man under observation after a mild heart attack, slept peacefully. The monitor, when it arrived, already showed normal reading. The next night, the sequence was repeated. Same sounds, same room. But this time, when he entered, the patient was awake, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "Did you hear it too?" he mumbled, not looking away. "What did you hear?" Rachel asked, trying to stay calm. "The voice. She spoke to me. He said I shouldn't be here." Rachel tried to reassure him, but the discomfort grew. That was no ordinary delirium. His tone was lucid, almost resigned. As she left the room, the nurse passed through the hallway and heard a muffled voice coming from the turned-off speaker. "You'll hear me too." On Wednesday, when she arrived for the shift, Rachel noticed that room 36 had been transferred. The patient had had an unexpected cardiac arrest and did not resist. The bed was now empty. During the night, the monitor started emitting the sequence of sounds again. Rachel approached, her eyes fixed on the screen. For an instant, the beat line drew words. She couldn't explain how, but it was clear. "Still here." Rachel began to investigate on her own. He talked to hospital technicians, reviewed the equipment maintenance records. He discovered that that same room had been the scene of several inexplicable events over the years. Patients with stable conditions who died suddenly, reports of voices, recurring dreams with a hooded figure at the bedside. It was then that he found an old medical record hidden among archived documents. Eliza Gordon, 28, admitted in 1976. She suffered from severe arrhythmias and was treated in the same room. After 3 months of hospitalization, he collapsed and died at 3 a.m. The team at the time reported that, in the days before her death, the monitors presented unusual messages, and that the patient said she heard voices coming out of the machines. In the early hours of Friday, Rachel decided to record the monitors. He positioned his cell phone with the camera facing the screen while making his rounds. Around 3:10 a.m., the monitor in room 36, still empty, activated on its own. A ghost reading began to flash. The camera recorded the moment when, clearly, the screen formed the phrase, "Do not leave." While reviewing the video, he noticed a second background sound, a whisper, low and continuous. As he amplified the audio, he could hear the same phrase from the speaker, "You will hear me too." The next night, Rachel didn't go to work. He asked for a replacement for health reasons, But the nurse who replaced her that morning, Michael Hughes, was found unconscious inside the monitor room, in a state of shock, with accelerated heartbeats and disconnected murmurs. When he woke up, he repeated the same thing. "She's inside the machines." Since then, room 36 has been deactivated, the monitor removed. But even today, some employees report hearing the unusual sequence of beeps in the empty aisles, always close to 3 a.m. And on some early mornings, the emergency speakers emit for just a second a low, feminine voice that asks, "Are you listening to it now too?" The night shift nurse. The Royal Infirmary of Manchester is an imposing hospital, with its modern wings attached to a centuries-old brick structure darkened by time and the stories that have accumulated there. During the day, the constant movement of doctors, patients and visitors makes the place seem like a living city. But at night, especially between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the hospital takes on another identity, quieter, slower, and some say more conscious. In this routine, Daniel Harris, a newly transferred nurse, began to adapt to the night shift. Young and dedicated, he used to take everything rationally. He was skeptical, practical, and paid no attention to rumors, until he started hearing about the nurse who doesn't belong to the staff. A female figure that circulated silently through the G-wing, always at night, whenever no one else was around. In the third week on duty, Daniel had his first strange experience. It was a rainy dawn, and the power system had fluctuated, forcing him to manually check each room in the ward. As he passed by bed 17, he saw a woman in a white coat leaning over the patient. Thinking it was a colleague he didn't know yet, he called for her. "Hey, do you need help?" She did not answer. She turned slowly to him, expressionless. Her face looked too pale, her eyes deepened and her clothes damp as if she'd been caught in the rain. In the blink of an eye, it just wasn't there anymore. Daniel ran to the bed. The patient was still asleep, monitors stable, no sign of the woman. He thought of tiredness, illusion, perhaps a reflex. He didn't comment to anyone. The next night, an elderly patient, hospitalized for respiratory complications, rushed Daniel in. "She was here," he whispered with wide eyes. "The night nurse. He woke me up to ask if I had already made my choice." "What choice?" he asked. "If I wanted to go now, or wait a little longer." Daniel felt a chill. He tried to argue, saying that no one but the authorized staff had access to the ward, but the woman insisted. She said that the nurse had come every night since she had arrived there. Determined to understand, Daniel began to study the records on duty. He looked for changes in schedule, new hires, any indication of temporary nurses in the G. Nada ward. But he found something curious. In the last 3 years, 5 patients died in bed 17. In all cases, death had occurred around 3 a.m., with no sign of clinical worsening in the previous moments, all reported having talked to a woman in a lab coat the night before. Intrigued, Daniel asked for access to the oldest records and found a name that repeated itself in documents from the 60s. Nurse Margaret Holloway. She was responsible for the G ward and known for her extreme commitment to terminally ill patients. A filed report read, "Nurse Holloway insists on holding dialogues with unconscious patients, saying she is preparing them for transition." In 1968, Margaret disappeared. According to the files, she was last seen during a night shift, walking through the corridors. His body was never found. Officially, she was considered missing under unknown circumstances. On Saturday night, Daniel decided to set up a vigil in the corridor of the G ward. He positioned a discreet camera near bed 17 and watched through the portable monitor. At 2:57 a.m., the hallway lights began to flicker. The camera captured a cloudy image of a figure entering the room. When Daniel ran there, he found the patient sleeping and the environment normal. But in the camera's viewfinder, the figure remained standing by the bedside, motionless, watching the patient. On Sunday, one of the nursing technicians reported that he saw someone strange walking towards the isolation ward, dressed in an old coat. Daniel asked to see the images from the security cameras. In one of the videos, it was possible to see a woman passing in the background, but with slow movements, as if the video was at another speed, and one detail caught the eye. On the back of the lab coat, embroidered in almost erased letters, the name Holloway. The next morning, Daniel was awakened by a call from room 17. Upon entering, the patient was sitting, eyes wide. She said, "Tonight is the night, that I've waited too long." Daniel held the patient's hand, trying to calm her down. But the heart monitor started beeping, pressure dropping, saturation falling. Doctors were called, procedures started. But the woman died at 3:03 a.m. On the death certificate, cause undetermined. In the camera recording, minutes before the collapse, the figure of the nurse appears clearer, this time looking directly into the lens and smiling. Since then, whenever a terminally ill patient is transferred to bed 17, the nurses exchange silent glances. Some refuse to cover that ward. And among the corridors of the Royal Infirmary, when the silence of dawn falls completely, there are those who say they hear firm footsteps, followed by a whisper, "Your turn has arrived."